I don't know the exact moment I started falling in love with Nora Ashford, but I know the exact second she first smiled at me. And I know that after 347 mornings of watching her walk through that glass door without so much as a flicker at the corner of her lips, that smile hit me the way morning light hits the east window of the bakery, sudden, warm, and impossible to look away from. She had walked in on a Tuesday. Same time as always. 7:28. Give or take a few seconds. The door pushed open with the soft jingle of the brass bell above it, letting in a brief rush of cold October air that smelled like wet pavement and turning leaves. And she was there. Black coat fitted close to her body, dark jeans tucked into ankle boots, the soft white blouse underneath, catching the light from the display case. Her dark hair was down that morning, resting against her collarbone the way it only did on days she hadn't rushed. And she moved through the door the way she always did, slowly, like she was orienting herself to a place she still wasn't entirely sure she deserved to be comfortable in. She stepped up to the counter, and I didn't wait. I already had the cup in my hand. Black coffee, no sugar, slight room at the top, because she always added exactly one pour from the small milk pitcher I kept at the counter's edge. And the croissant. Butter, not almond, slightly darker than golden because I had learned, not from her telling me. She had never told me anything about herself directly, but she liked things a little more done than most people ordered. I set both on the counter before she had the chance to open her mouth. And that was when it happened. She looked at the cup, then the croissant, then back up at me. And for the first time in almost a year, Nora Ashford smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't the kind that takes over a whole face and announces itself to the room. It was small and quiet and gone almost before I fully caught it, but it was real. Her lips curved just slightly at the corners, and something in her dark eyes shifted, like a window that had been painted shut for a long time suddenly letting in a thread of light. She said, her voice low and a little wondering, "You already know my order." I opened my mouth, closed it, managed something like, "You come in every morning." She picked up the cup, looked at me over the rim. "So do a lot of people." She was right about that. But I hadn't started memorizing other people's orders down to the angle of the pour. And I think, by the way she held my gaze for one extra second before she looked away, she knew it too. She paid the way she always did. Exact change, placed quietly on the counter. She picked up her things. But this time, just before she turned to go, she glanced back at me once more. The ghost of that smile was still there. Then the door swung shut behind her, and I stood at the counter with my hand still resting on the register, feeling like the ordinary Tuesday had just cracked open into something entirely new. Let me take you back. Because that moment, the smile, the 6 words, the way the whole room seemed to hold its breath, none of it started on a Tuesday in October. It started 13 months before it, on a gray September morning when I was running on 3 hours of sleep. Flour on my forearms up to the elbows, and a broken espresso machine I had fixed with electrical tape, and a kind of blind faith that had seen me through worse. That was the morning Nora walked into the bakery for the first time. I had been awake since 4, which is standard when you run a place called The Morning Loaf. It's a small bakery on the corner of Renner Street and 5th, sandwiched between a dry cleaner that only opens 4 days a week and a hardware store run by a man named Finn who has never, in the 3 years I've known him, appeared to be in a hurry about anything at all. The bakery had been my father's. He opened it when I was 7 years old and ran it until his heart gave out 3 years ago, right here in this kitchen. He was standing at the mixer when it happened. They said it was fast. I'd like to believe that. I inherited the building, the lease, the equipment, the regulars, and every recipe he had ever written on the backs of crumpled paper bags that lived in a drawer beneath the register. I'd also inherited the debt. The bakery doesn't make me rich. It barely makes me comfortable most months. But it's mine and smells like him when the oven is full. And that is enough to get me out of bed at 4 in the morning without too much argument from the part of me that would rather sleep. That September, I had a part-time employee named Owen who helped with the lunch rush and once invented a cream cheese. Danish I will not describe in polite company. I had regulars, Mrs. Patel, a retired schoolteacher who took a cinnamon roll every Friday and pretended she didn't. A college student who ordered the same breakfast sandwich for 2 full semesters before I ever learned his name. The couple from the next street who came every Sunday and argued cheerfully about which of them had better taste in pastry. I knew these people. I knew their orders and their routines and the rhythms of their small talk. That was the job, and I was good at it. Then Nora came in. The first thing I noticed was that she moved differently than most people who came through that door. Most people come into a bakery the way they come into anywhere, already talking, already on their phones, already halfway to the next thing. Nora came in slowly. She stopped just inside the door for a moment, dark eyes moving deliberately across the display case, the chalkboard menu on the wall, the cluster of small tables near the front window. She was wearing a fitted gray coat that came to just above her knees, dark trousers beneath it, a blouse in a deep burgundy that caught the bakery light in a way that made you look twice. Her hair was down, thick and very dark, resting on her shoulders, and she had the kind of face that didn't announce itself, but that you kept looking at anyway, trying to understand what you were reading in it. She stepped up to the counter and looked at the menu board for a long moment without looking at me. Then she said, quietly, "Black coffee. And 1 croissant, butter, please." That was it. No smile, no small talk, no good morning. She paid exact change. She took the corner table, the one furthest from the window, furthest from everyone else, sat with her back to the room, and stayed for exactly 19 minutes by the clock on the wall. Then she left. I don't know why I noticed the 19 minutes. I just did. She came back the next morning. Same order, same corner table, same 19 minutes. She came back the morning after that, and the one after that. By the end of the first week, Owen had noticed. He leaned against the back counter during a slow stretch one morning and said, without looking up from what he was doing, "The woman in the corner. She here again?" "Every day this week. She never talks to anyone." "No." He glanced toward the empty corner. "Does she ever smile?" I thought about it. "Not yet," I said. Owen gave me the kind of look he had learned not to follow with words, which was one of the things I genuinely liked about him. October became November. The display case filled with pumpkin bread and spiced apple turnovers and the particular smell of cardamom and brown sugar that I associated, without being able to explain it, with the feeling of things slowing down towards something warmer. Nora came in every morning at 7:28. She ordered the same thing. She sat at the same table. She did not smile. She did not chat. Some mornings she had a book. Occasionally, she had papers, lesson plans I would eventually learn, because I would eventually understand she taught art to 4th graders at the elementary school 4 blocks up the street. But most mornings she just sat quietly with her coffee and her croissant and her 19 minutes. And I began to understand, without knowing a single fact about her life, that she was carrying something heavy. I have seen people carrying heavy things before. My father used to say that a good baker learns to read people better than most, because people come to bakeries when they need somewhere warm to put things down for a while. He wasn't wrong. I had seen grief walk through that door in 100 different shapes over 3 years. And grief was what I saw in Nora Ashford every morning, quiet and persistent and very carefully held in. I didn't try to push through it. I learned that the wrong kind of attention can make a person pull further away, and the last thing I wanted was for her to stop coming. So I made her coffee and her croissant, and I said, "Good morning, and have a good day," and nothing else. But I watched. Not in any way that would make someone uncomfortable, just the way you watch someone when you find yourself hoping, without quite knowing why, that they are all right. I noticed when she came in looking more tired than usual. I noticed the morning her eyes were red at the rims, and she stayed for 30 minutes instead of 19. I noticed the way she always held the cup with both hands in cold weather, like she needed the warmth against her palms. And I started, without consciously deciding to, paying close attention to what she liked. She always added one pour from the milk pitcher, about 2 tablespoons, never more. She always broke the croissant in half before eating it. She always left the last 3 sips of coffee. Little things. The kinds of things you only register when you're genuinely looking. By January, I had her order ready before she reached the counter. I told myself it was efficiency. Owen raised an eyebrow the first time he saw it and had the decency not to say anything out loud, which I appreciated deeply. February arrived with its particular version of cruelty. The cold that decides it isn't finished with you. The short days that feel even shorter. The bakery windows fogging over on the inside so that the world outside looked like a painting left in the rain. Nora came in on the 2nd Friday of the month and sat at her corner table and didn't touch her croissant. She just held her cup and looked at the wall in front of her. The bakery was nearly empty. I came around the counter on the pretext of wiping the nearby table and said, quietly enough not to startle her, "Not hungry this morning?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were darker than usual, the kind of dark that sits behind them rather than in them. "I'm not sure what I am this morning," she said. It came out like she hadn't entirely meant to say it aloud. I nodded. I didn't push further. When I came back behind the counter, I set a 2nd cup, chamomile tea, warm, not coffee. Because coffee sharpens things, and sometimes what a person needs is the opposite of sharp, near the edge closest to her table. She looked at it. She looked at me. She said nothing, but she picked it up. And she stayed for 35 minutes. That was the first real thing I understood about her. She didn't need someone to fix whatever she was carrying. She just needed somewhere warm enough to set it down for a little while. Spring came, and the mornings got lighter, and the display case changed over to lemon tarts and lavender shortbread, and the air, coming in through the open door, smelled like wet earth and something beginning again. Nora's coat changed too, a soft navy cotton thing that fit her differently than the heavy gray wool of winter. Closer to her frame, and she started occasionally wearing her hair loose rather than pulled back. And I noticed this the way I had noticed everything else about her, which is to say quietly and without meaning to, and with a growing awareness that I was paying far too much attention to someone I had never really spoken to. The first real conversation happened in late May on a Friday. She came in at the usual time and reached into her bag for her wallet and stopped. "I lost my card," she said. It was the most personal thing she had ever said to me. Not because it was intimate, it wasn't, but because it assumed I was someone she could say an unplanned thing to. "Don't worry about it," I said. She shook her head. "I don't take things for free." "It's not free. You've been paying every morning for 8 months. Call it one on the house." She looked at me for a long moment. 8 months, she said. "You counted." "I'm a baker," I said. "I notice patterns." Another beat. She picked up the cup. "Thank you," she said, and it came out softer than anything she had said to me before. She went to the corner table, but she stayed for 45 minutes. I have thought a lot since then about what those 13 months of mornings actually were. If you have ever spent a long time hoping for a crack in someone's wall without knowing how to push on it yourself, you already understand the particular texture of it. I was 31 years old. I had been running this bakery for 3 years, and I was not inexperienced when it came to loneliness, not the dramatic kind, just the steady, ordinary kind that builds up slowly in a person who has lost someone and learned to keep very busy in the space they left behind. After my father died, I had learned exactly how large a quiet apartment above a bakery can feel at night. I wasn't looking for anyone when Nora walked through my door that September. But somewhere between the first morning and the 347th, she had become the best part of my days. And I didn't know what to do with that except wake up and show up and have the coffee waiting and hope that one day she would smile. Then came the Tuesday I told you about. October again, wet pavement and turning leaves. 7:28, the brass bell and the rush of cold air, and Nora in her fitted black coat with her dark hair loose to one side, and when I set her coffee and her croissant on the counter before she said a word. She looked at them, then at me, and said the 6 words that changed everything. And she smiled. I turned it over in my mind for 3 days before I did anything about it. I had rehearsed no fewer than 4 ways to start a real conversation and abandoned all of them because they sounded like something I would manage in a dream and never in actual life. In the end, on Friday, she came in, paid, and before she turned for her table, she stopped. "Have you always been a baker?" she asked. I set down the cloth in my hand. "Since about 7, I said. My dad let me shape the rolls on Saturday mornings. I mostly produce things that look like lumpy footballs." The corner of her mouth moved. "Did anyone eat them?" "He did. Everyone." Something passed through her face at that, a softness, and then a shadow, quick and quiet. "He sounds like a good father," she said. "The best I knew," I said. She nodded slowly. She picked up her order. And then she walked not to the corner table, but to the small table right next to the counter, the one closest to where I worked. I made a point of not making a point of it. The next morning she did the same. And the morning after that. By the 3rd morning she had started talking to me the way people talk when they have decided, quietly and without ceremony, to stop being strangers. She asked about the recipes on the chalkboard. I told her about the ones that had been my father's. She asked about the almond croissant. I explained the twice baking, the frangipane, the particular ratio of bitter almond to sugar. She listened with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested, leaning slightly forward on her elbows, and I found myself talking more than I usually did in the mornings. One morning she offered her name. "I'm Nora, by the way," she said, as though she'd just realized she'd never mentioned it. "I know," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Patel," I admitted. Something shifted in her expression, and then she laughed, a brief, surprised sound that seemed to catch her off guard as much as it caught me. It was the first time I had heard her laugh, and it changed the shape of the room. "Of course it was Mrs. Patel," she said. "I'm Caleb," I said. "I know," she said. "The name's on the sign." I looked at the wall behind me. "That sign says the Morning Loaf." "The photograph," she said. "By the register." The cardboard sign in the background. I turned. There was, in fact, a framed photo of my father on opening day. A piece of cardboard behind him with Caleb's Bakery, painted in the handwriting he'd given up on after the first week. He'd kept the photo. I had never considered whether anyone read it. "You noticed that," I said. She looked at me steadily. "I've been sitting in here for a year," she said, a little quietly. I noticed everything. There was something in those 3 words that went somewhere deeper than the sentence, and I felt it but didn't pull on it. 2 mornings later, something arrived that changed the shape of everything, and not in a good way. I found a notice taped to the glass of the front door at 4 in the morning. A property management company called Harwood Commercial had acquired our building. They were informing me that when my lease expired in the spring, they would not be renewing it. They intended to convert the ground floor space into a retail extension of the coffee franchise that had opened 2 blocks away. What they were saying, in the careful language of commercial property, was that in 6 months I would no longer have a bakery. I stood on the sidewalk in the dark, with flour already on my hands, and the notice in my fingers, and felt the specific gravity of something being taken that belongs to you. 3 years of early mornings in that building. My father's recipes in the drawer. The east window that filled with gold at 7 o'clock. The brass bell. I didn't tell anyone that day. I went in and baked and opened at 6:30 and served the morning rush, and when Nora came in at 7:28, I had her order waiting the way I always did. But something must have shown in my face, because she looked at me a beat longer than usual after picking up her cup and said, simply, "Are you all right?" "Long night," I said. She studied me for another second. Then she sat at the counter table, and when the rush had thinned, she said, "You don't have to tell me." But something happened. I leaned on the counter and looked at the east window. November light, thin and gray, and still somehow worth looking at. "I got a notice this morning," I said. "The building's been sold. They want me out by spring." Silence. Nora set down her cup. "Can they do that?" "When the lease is up, yes." She was quiet. Her hands were around the cup, the way they always were in cold weather. "What will you do?" I looked at her. "I don't know yet. I haven't gotten that far." She nodded slowly. And then she did something she had never done in over a year of sitting across the counter from me. She reached forward and placed her hand over mine for just a moment. Warm and brief, and then gone. "I'm sorry," she said. It was 2 words. The most important things usually are. December arrived, and the bakery filled with the smell of cinnamon and clove from the holiday specials. And I hired a lawyer, an old friend who agreed to look at the lease language for nearly nothing. And he found a clause my father had negotiated years ago that Harwood Commercial hadn't properly voided in the sale. A potential loophole. It wasn't certain, but it was something, and something was what I needed. Owen heard about the notice and offered to take a pay cut toward the legal costs. I told him no. He did it anyway, and told me to argue about it later when I was less stressed. Nora started coming in for the afternoon sometimes. She'd sit at the counter table with tea and papers to grade, and we'd talk between customers, and the bakery felt different with her in it. Warmer. More like what it was supposed to be. It was on one of those December afternoons that she told me about her brother. She looked up from her papers and said, without any preamble at all, "My brother died 14 months ago." The whole bakery went quiet around the sentence. I stopped what I was doing. She was looking at the counter, not at me. "Car accident," she said. He was 24. He was the kind of person who made every room he walked into feel better just by being there. And then he wasn't there anymore, and the room I'd been living in felt like it had permanently lost its air. She went quiet. The afternoon light was fading outside, and the oven behind me was running its low, steady hum. "That's why I moved here," she said. "Not because this town is special, just because it wasn't the place where everything reminded me of him. I thought starting somewhere new might help. Did it?" She looked up at me directly. "This did," she said. "This bakery. Coming here every morning. Having one thing be the same, every single day. It sounds small." "It's not small," I said. Her eyes were bright and not quite full. She pressed her lips together for a moment. "The morning you had my order ready without asking." That was the first day in over a year that I felt like someone had noticed me. Not my grief, me. I came around the counter and sat across from her. And we stayed like that in the kind of quiet that exists between 2 people who have both been carrying things alone for too long and have finally found someone willing to sit with the weight of it. That was the evening everything shifted between us. not dramatically, not in any way anyone watching would have been able to name clearly. But I think we both understood, without saying it, that whatever this had been building toward, it was no longer just coffee and croissants and a brass bell above a door. January arrived with the hearing date set for February and news that Harwood Commercial had decided to fight the clause. They had money and a legal team, and I had one tired lawyer working for less than he should have charged, and 3 years of paid rent and the moral argument that a neighborhood bakery that had stood for 15 years should not be displaced by a franchise looking for square footage. Moral arguments, as it turns out, carry limited legal weight on their own. Nora was sick for 10 days in mid-January. Not here, not at the counter table, not at 7:28. I noticed her absence in a way that had nothing to do with the number of customers. Owen said, without looking up from the bread he was shaping, "You've refilled the same cup 3 times this morning." I looked at the cup in my hand. "I'm tired." "No," he said. "You're not tired." He went back to the kitchen. He was not wrong. She came back on a Thursday, thinner than she'd been, voice carrying the rough edge of someone not quite finished recovering, and she looked like the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. I had a cup of tea waiting for her, not coffee, because I had learned she drank tea when she was unwell, and when she sat down and saw it, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully name except that it made me feel, briefly, like someone worth something. "You knew I was sick," she said. "You've been out 10 days, and you came back thin," I said. "Tea's better on a sensitive stomach." She held the cup. "You pay attention to everything," she said softly. "About you," I said. I hadn't planned to say it that plainly. She looked at me. I looked back. The brass bell rang and a customer came through the door, and I went to help them. And when I returned, Nora had her hands around the cup and was looking at the window with an expression I couldn't read but didn't want to stop looking at. The February hearing came and went. The clause held, barely, with conditions, but it held. The lease would be renewed. The bakery would stay. My lawyer called at noon, and I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and felt, for the first time since October, as though I could breathe all the way down. I went out front and told Owen, and he set down what he was holding and said something I will not repeat in this company. Nora came in at 3. She walked through the door and looked at my face and stopped before she reached the counter. What happened? I told her. She raised both hands and covered her mouth for a moment, the way she did when something landed harder than she'd expected. Then she lowered them and said, "Caleb." It was the first time she had used my name. She had always said you. She had said thank you and good morning, and I didn't know that. But not my name. Something about my name in her voice was entirely different from any other word she had ever said in my bakery. "Come celebrate," I said. "Stay for dinner. I'm closing early." She laughed, that brief surprise sound that always seemed to catch her off guard. "I can bring wine," she said. "I don't know anything about wine." "I know enough. For both of us." We closed the bakery. At 5 and 8 at the counter table with the lights, warm and the evening pressing dark, against the windows and a bottle Nora had stopped to buy on the way back. I made dinner from what I had on hand. Roasted vegetables, good bread, a soup from leftover stock. We talked for 3 hours. About her brother Sam, who had been funny in the way only the people who truly love you can be funny. Who had known exactly which version of a joke landed and which one didn't. About my father, who had been the same way. About what it cost to lose the steady center of your understanding of home. About the strange grace of small routines when everything else has been reorganized by grief. The bakery was quiet around us, and the bread smell was in the walls, the way it always was at night, and I thought, sitting there across from her in the warm, low light, that I could not remember the last time a room had felt this right. At some point, The conversation changed the way conversations change when something is being said underneath the words. Nora set down her glass and looked at me and said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "All right. Have you been saving my table?" "I don't technically save tables," I said, "but I've never put anyone at the counter table when you weren't here." She looked at the table between us. "Why?" "Because you looked like you needed a place that was yours," I said, "even if it was just a small table in someone else's bakery." She was very quiet for a moment. Then, "The morning I smiled," she said. "When you said you come in every morning." "Yes." I said, "So do a lot of people." I remember. "I knew right then that I hadn't been invisible to you," she said. "I had been telling myself for over a year that I wasn't ready for anything to matter again, that I wasn't capable of it yet. And then you said 7 words and I realized that something had already been mattering for a long time. I just hadn't let myself know it." The wine glass was between her hands. The light above the counter was warm. "The thing is," she said, and her voice was careful and honest and a little afraid, "I think this has already been something for a long while. I just didn't know how to say it." I looked at her across the small table in my father's bakery. "Then stop trying to say it right," I said. "Say it however it comes out." She looked down once, then up. "I love coming here," she said. "I love being known here. I love that you noticed what I liked before you knew my name. I love that you kept the table. I love that you had tea waiting when I was sick." She stopped. Then, quieter, "I think I love you." The last part was barely above a breath, the way the most honest things usually are. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been in love with you since February," I said. Her eyes went wide. "That was 9 months before I smiled at you." "You never needed to smile at me for me to see you," I said. "I just hoped you would, eventually." Her hand was warm in mine. She let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else entirely, something softer and more relieved than laughing. Outside, the February night pressed against the bakery windows. Inside, everything was exactly the right kind of small. The days after that were different in the way days are different. When someone has stopped standing at the edge of your life and simply stepped into the middle of it. Nora started coming in earlier some mornings so we could talk before the rush. She brought me a book she thought I would like, an old novel about a traveling cook, and I stayed up reading it past midnight and told her so the next morning. And she looked pleased in the careful way she was learning to let herself look pleased. Owen watched this with the expression of a person who had accurately predicted a weather event several months in advance, and was now watching it arrive on schedule. He said nothing about it for a full week, which I believe was a personal record, and then he said, as he was leaving one Thursday evening, "She's good, Caleb." "I know," I said. "She's been good since September." "I mean for you," he said. "She looks at you like you're something worth seeing." He put on his coat and left, and I stood in the kitchen for a while with that thought and the smell of the last batch of the day. Spring came back around and the east window filled with gold again at 7 in the morning, and Nora started coming behind the counter sometimes, learning which drawer held the extra spoons, learning the rhythm of the morning in the way that people learn things they have decided are worth knowing. Mrs. Patel came in one Saturday in April and looked at the two of us on the same side of the counter and said, to no one in particular and both of us at the same time, "Well, it certainly took long enough." Nora laughed so freely it surprised her. I didn't disagree. One evening in late April, a year and 7 months after the first September morning, Nora came through the door just before closing. She was still in her school clothes, dark trousers, a fitted blue top that caught the bakery light, her hair pinned back the way she wore it on teaching days, and she had the look she got when she had been carrying something around all day and had finally decided it was time to set it down. She sat at the counter table. I went to visit Sam's grave today, she said. I stopped what I was doing. I go every year around his birthday, she said, looking at the counter. I used to leave there feeling like all the air had gone out of the world. Today I cried, the way I always do. And then I thought about coming here. And the thought of you, of this, was already making me feel like there was air again. I came around the counter and sat across from her. She looked at me with eyes that were still wet and entirely honest. He would have liked you, she said quietly. He liked people who were steady. I'm glad, I said. And I'm glad you came here. She put her hand on the table between us, palm up. I put mine in hers. This was the place I came to put things down, she said. You make it the place I come to pick things back up. I don't have a grand ending for you. There was no single perfect moment that wrapped everything into a bow, because life doesn't run on that kind of timeline, and neither does love. Not the real kind. What I have is this, a bakery that stayed. A table by the counter that is permanently hers. A woman who walks through my door every morning at 7:28 and who has, for these last several months, smiled at me before she even reaches the counter. What I have is the weight of her hand in mine and the knowledge that the most important things sometimes begin so quietly that you don't realize. They've started until they are already deep and certain in your bones. I found something once, tucked in the drawer beneath the register, along with all my father's recipes. A note on the back of a flour bag in his handwriting. It said, "The best bread is the kind that rises slowly. No shortcuts. No rushing the proof. You give it the warmth it needs and the time it asks for, and when it is ready, you will know." I think about Nora when I read that now. I think about every morning and every cup and every 19 minutes she spent at the corner table carrying something heavy into a room that was warm enough to hold some of the weight. I think about 347 mornings and one small smile and 6 quiet words that changed the shape of everything. You already know my order. I did. And I think, in the way that matters most, she already knew mine too.